Well, welcome. Welcome to Panel B for today's session. I don't know if any of you have been able to make it to any of the others, but it's been quite an exciting day, and we hope that this panel provides a lot of information for you about your options in social impact investing. Today's panel includes Timothy Freilich, who's Director of Strategic Development for Calvert Social Investment Foundation, which is a nonprofit social enterprise finance company managing a range of projects that bring together the philanthropy and social investment spaces. Tim has been with Calvert Foundation since 1997 and manages business development, strategic partnerships, and new product development. Also on the panel is Rick Mordesevich from Neuberger Berman and Lehman Brothers. Mr. Mordesevich is a senior vice president with Neuberger Berman, Lehman Brothers, responsible for advising individuals, families, and their foundations on asset management, asset protection, philanthropic initiatives, risk budgeting, and wealth transfer strategies. His practice centers on building sustainable business relationships rooted in integrity through values-based planning and socially responsive investing. And finally, we have Blaine Townsend, who is VP and Portfolio Manager for Trillium Asset Management. Prior to joining the firm in September of 1996, he worked for the San Francisco political consulting and communications firm Staton, Hughes, and Sheffer. He was assistant to the executive director of Earth Day 1990 and assistant director of marketing and social research for the Mir Investment Trust, the first socially screened municipal bond fund. Now I would like to invite you to hear our panel, and again, please feel free to ask questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Tim Freundlich from the Calvert Foundation, and I wanted to find out quick, has anybody been at any of the other sessions today, or what's the breakdown here? Sort of 50-50. All right, that gives us a little bit of intelligence as to previous ground covered. We've been talking a lot today about microfinance in particular, and then the last panel sort of opened that up across a very broad spectrum of the sort of socially responsible investing, of screening out of publicly traded stocks and bonds and looking for good companies, and community development, social enterprise, microfinance. So what I wanted to do was sort of start from there, and we're going to move through a progression where I kind of start with microcredit pretty close to the ground, but then also sort of extend that spectrum. And then I think we're going to go and extend it even further with Blaine and Rick into some of the broader sort of socially responsible, social purpose investment strategies and how people deal with that with portfolios. I think what's been interesting today and is always interested in these conversations is that we first have to start by bringing ourselves to the conversation before you can even make sense of the landscape. So it becomes really variant. Like there's microcredit, there's affordable housing, there's stocks and bonds that are screened out and in and all this stuff. And until you really start with getting clear about what your motivation for even giving two kitties about it, then it's sort of neither here nor there. At least that's been my experience in dealing with a lot of people, and myself being and my wife being the first of those two. So what I wanted to do is actually just do something a little bit different for me. This is a bit of a prototype, so we get to play here, which is fun. And Kevin Jones actually is in the back in the Ziggy.net team, XIGI team, which is doing some really cool market landscaping in the space. And then in my capacity with Calvert, also bringing some of their intelligence, has been playing around with sort of the next generation of how do we approach these questions. And so we sort of took a crack at a little bit of what I was just saying, which is what are these archetypes of people, or what are the facets that we bring? And we kind of came up with three of them. There's sort of three modalities, and I'm not saying these are mutually exclusive. You're not just one or the other or the other. I know for a fact myself, I have at least all three of these and a couple others as part of my personality, being pretty schizophrenic. The first one is the sort of a conventional but not quite conventional investor who is really looking to bring social purpose and sort of rationalize that stuff and the stuff they care about a bit to their portfolio, but is pretty attached to mainstream understanding of risk and return. Meaning, yeah, I want to mix in the social and environmental stuff and purpose, but I don't want to give much up for it. That's perfectly valid, and that's a great mode to be in. The second one is a bit of what we might call euphemistically as the concessionary investor, and this is there's a lot of good in here too, which is somebody who's really thinking about a bit of a departure from sort of that market rateness of financial return and risk, who's really wants to dig down a bit and figure out how to incorporate social purpose and value creation at the community level into the decisions they're making with their money, and is willing to actually sort of walk away a bit from the conventional wisdom of what return and market rate is in doing that, to create those kind of social value. And then the third person is a pretty radical catalyst sort of person, which is saying, you know what, I don't buy the whole thing with at least some of my money. I really want to totally fuse philanthropy with some recoverable investment capital, and I'm going to reach down and fill the biggest gaps I can find in the capital market, but I'm going to put it out as, it's almost like recoverable grants. I want to get a lot of leverage. I want to go places where I want to go to countries where it's really unstable, or I want to go to really early stage stuff that that has a big chance of blowing up. So you just kind of see a spectrum. So it's not just that there's this incredibly wide range of sectors and geographies to deal with as a sort of socially aware investor, but there's also a range of sort of modes to be in. So I thought we would just actually pick one of these. Let's start with this nice looking person. And we're putting $1 million to work for a year. I don't know if people saw that, but there's sort of, we got $1 million down here. And I think that she's interested, and normally we'd play around with interactive with the audience, but we're really on sort of like little 10-minute blocks here. Is interested in international stuff and microfinance. Again, this is a person who's pretty interested in getting into this hybrid space, but is at the same time really concerned about the risk and return and how that's, this is not philanthropy exactly. This is taking their normal investment mindset and bringing it in. So this person puts a whole bunch of money out there and is sort of like, well, what do I got going on? These are some people that we've already heard from today. I mean, Maria Artero was talking earlier about Accion. They have a wide range of individual investors who are, hold on a second. Sorry. This would be the prototype part. Not, this is fine, it's me that's the problem. All right, so here's our sort of return conscious investor, interested in microcredit, interested internationally. There's an increasing amount of really cool microcredit stuff out there to invest in. In this example, and this is just pulled from the data sets that we have in this new online setup at ziggy.net, there's a Developing World Markets Blue Orchard out of Netherlands. They've securitized a really rich set of a lot of Latin American microfinance groups that are creating impact by making small loans to mostly women in Latin America. And they had a debt offering in the last time that actually returned 4.8%. So it was like the Treasury bill plus a little bit of extra, and it had an OPEC guarantee. So an OPEC guarantee is a sort of overseas private investment corporation. It's like a quasi-government agency in the United States. It's not like FDIC insurance, but heck, it's not bad. So that's actually pretty good. I mean, you're not taking a huge haircut. It's a stable investment. You're getting better than T-bill, Treasury bill matched term, like 6 years to 6 years, plus a little bit extra. Microvest is another one that we've met today. They actually have an equity investment that's still really well diversified and has about 8% return. So there's another example of an investment that is a little different, a little higher risk and higher return. Interestingly, Blue Orchard has another tranche where you can do equity in the same offering. So you've got an equity tranche where you get 12%. And on and on and on. I mean, these are just an example, but this just shows that these are pretty. Let's skip the equity one, and just because we only need one Blue Orchard, there's no reason to invest twice in that. And I mean, each one of these has an incredible portfolio of stories and impact. And I guess the idea here, I mean, the high-level takeaway, and obviously this is just, we're just sort of running through this, but there's a rich landscape here that can really be matched to this investor's sort of mindset, their sort of risk and return appetite, and they can choose. They can move quite a lot of money to it. And each one of these will have a certain sort of social and financial return associated with them. In Microvest's portfolio, I mean, according to the information that we've gathered from them, if you put in a third of $1,000,000 is $333,000 for a year, you'd actually create, you'd finance 184 micro enterprises and create about twice that many jobs. I mean, you haven't given away a penny. This is pretty close to a market rate return. So that's great news. And you get a nice financial return. And so if you put out $1,000,000 into this kind of a portfolio, you would have a total return on a year of about $70,000 annualized across that mix that we were looking at. And on $1 million, that's 7%. Now, this is about as good as it gets. I won't kid you when you start getting to this hybrid sort of high impact stuff. But importantly, you're also going to have created, on each one of these 200, looks like 184, 400, 500. I mean, there's like 1,500 jobs, 1,500 families whose lives you've changed, all without giving away money. This is per $1 million per year. You leave it out 10 years, multiply it 10x. You put out 10 million as maybe your company or whatever, you get more. So I think that that's pretty cool all in all. And let's see if I can't refresh. Does anybody know how to? Obviously I don't want to take up too much time because we got to move through two more. But let's just take one other one just to see. This guy looks nice. He's very well kept. And I don't know any of these people, by the way, just so you know, these are not real people. We protect the innocent. But here's our sort of concessionary, we like to call him a haircut investor, jokingly, not just because he's got a good haircut. And this is somebody who's willing to get a little more creative in terms of their risk return. They want to take a little bit more to create more impact. And this guy, he's a little more interested in what's going on at home, I think. Yep. And he likes these guys with the ketchup bottles. No, in social enterprise, I mean, microfinance is a great set of business. I mean, of investable, high impact stuff. But it's part of a spectrum. I mean, we just sort of in this prototype have focused across affordable housing, social enterprises, which are sort of new hybrid businesses that do workforce creation and take, match people to really great products and services and communities, and then obviously microcredit. But let's just look quick at this. I mean, this is one of my favorite stories. I mean, Evergreen Destination Holdings is actually two GSB Stanford grads who joined with a 20-year veteran of Outward Bound. They started a for-profit business that was incubated out of Juma Ventures, which is the Ben & Jerry's Scoop Shop franchisee, the nonprofit youth development services group in San Francisco. So it was birthed out of a nonprofit, took this Outward Bound guy, these two GSB grad MBAs. They started this company. They bought a 1950s mom and pop eco lodge, sort of a lodge, but they turned it into an eco lodge, and they took it from $500,000 of revenue in the year that they took it over in 3 years to $5 million. So they did 10 times, and that's kind of nice. That's a socially responsible business, eco lodge, whatever. But they're taking a third of their employees are Hunters Bay Viewpoint at-risk inner-city San Francisco youth, and they're giving them wraparound social services, Outward Bound trading, a living wage, hospitality service. It's such a great story. And this one they have they've taken debt and equity. In this case, we're just looking at a profile of a 12% IRR on the equity, which is, it's not venture returns. I mean, this is not like supercharged stuff. So that's why I wouldn't call it, exactly market rate. If people are taking direct exposure in one company, it could blow up on you. So I think that it's a little bit hard how to bucket these things out. I mean, Calvert, where I work, we have a great, you can see it's totally different. It's only 3% return. Gosh, that seems crazy. Why would I only want to make 3% when I can get 12%? Well, 12% in one company that if something goes on in that micro economy, it could blow up. In the Calvert Community Investment Fund that specializes in social enterprise domestically, we've got a whole diversified portfolio where you're taking on hardly any risk, and it's got a big security enhancement, a big like kind of insurance thing. So there's just an example of, you know, two things that maybe have a somewhat rationalized risk return sort of comparison, even though you're not making nearly as much. But I mean, again, all of these things have their own sorts of, I mean, microcredit, whereas you saw the jobs in the hundreds, in the United States, you're talking about interventions in people's lives in the tens. So the social return and the financial return have a bit of a complicated relationship. But I mean, again, you know, if you blend these two together, you're still making $75,000 a year on that million, that 7.5%. You've probably taken on, you know, a little more risk though for that than perhaps some of the other ones that we were looking at. So that's just an example again of how variant the space is. But again, sort of the takeaway here is none of this stuff. These are not recommendations. This is just sort of looking at this landscape, and it's about a discovery, I think, very much at this point, both in terms of what motivates an investor and how they want to look at the return, and also what the heck they want to invest in. And I think with that, I want to turn it over. But I do encourage, if anybody wants to be sort of kept in the loop as we're developing some of this landscaping stuff, give me your business card afterwards, and I'll make sure to shoot, or maybe I'll even send it to you and you can send it out to the people, because we'll be rolling out some of this stuff that you can play around with yourself soon. Thanks a lot. And there's also some materials over there. Oh, great.
While they're doing the quick switcheroo, I'm Rick Mordesevich with Neuberger Berman, and I was hoping to have a wandering mic, more Oprah Winfrey style. That's okay, I can just stand it. While we're doing that, my legal department insists that I read a disclosure. The material in this presentation is not intended to address every situation, nor is it a substitute for legal, accounting, or financial counsel for your professional advisors with respect to individual circumstances. Any stocks I talk about today are not recommendations, but for examples only. So with that, we're going to sort of switch gears a little bit and talk specifically about U.S. domestic equities with sort of a socially responsive bent. I'm not sure if you've heard of Neuberger Berman, but we've been around since 1939 managing money. Today, we're a $105 billion shop, and we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Lehman Brothers. We've been in the socially responsive space for about 20 years. We are doing a balancing act of how do we create an investment return for our clients as well as doing social good, and we believe we can do well and we can do good. It's been a terrific day here hearing about microfinance, and Lehman Brothers is also at the forefront of that. We're in the process of launching our own microfinance-backed fund. That'll be a little bit different than sort of what we heard about today. We're going from, instead of the top 50 microfinance funds that are out there, we're going to start with number 51 to 250. So going a little further down the food chain, but stay tuned, more on that in the next probably 90 to 120 days. I must say, since I'm here at Google, it is absolutely true that you can make money without doing evil. I know that is one of your business principles here, and I just had to say that and get that out on the table. SRI is not, I'm going to say SRI, socially responsive investing, is not a one-size-fits-all. Everyone in this room sort of comes to this meeting with different ideas, different objectives. We were all raised differently, and when I bring in a client, I like to really understand what their history is with money, how they view money. Were you raised with money? Were you raised without money? If you were raised in a family with money, were your parents, did they like to display their wealth? Did they get a new Jaguar every couple of years? Or did they drive a 10-year-old Ford Taurus, and were they embarrassed by money? And I think it plays an important role when we start to talk about money, what it means to our values, and how that lines up with our investing, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Generally, money is good for three things. I think you can spend it, you can invest it, or you can give it away. When you think about social change or social good, or how do we have an impact, I think we're all very familiar with grant money, writing a check, you give it to a 501c3, to a worthy organization, and you do some good. But we can also do good in other ways. I think there are now tons of information out on the websites out there about where do you spend your money as a consumer. If I want to buy a new Apple laptop, where do I go? Do I shop at Walmart? Do I shop at Costco? So, having some power with how we spend our money, we have that same power in how we invest our money. So just thinking a little bit more clearly and a little bit more wisely, trying to align our values with our portfolios, and that's really what we're doing at Neuberger. Recently Tim, you advance this forward, oh, there you go. This is a quote from The Economist from a week ago, and I think it's very, very timely as we start thinking about how we create change. And one way to create change, which we're going to talk about on this panel, is through our proxy values. If you're a shareholder in a company, and I think the slide on shareholder democracy is a little bit deceiving in the United States today. We all sort of think you own a share of stock, you have a vote. And that's not necessarily true. We're going to get into transparency and accountability, and a lot of our votes as a shareholder when it comes to executive compensation, when it comes to the makeup of our boards, are more precatory, where a vote is more of an advisory vote. And if you're voting against someone, your vote doesn't even count. The votes just for candidates are counted, and that's a little disheartening, but we can talk about that more if you have questions on that later. Investors are really concerned over financial markets, corporate management, and ethics is playing a larger and larger role. Who here, by a show of hands, has either read the book or seen the movie, The Smartest Guys in the Room? If you haven't, you really should put it on your Netflix list. It's a great, great movie, and it's very timely. It's about the Enron scandal, and it's in the courts right now, and I think you'd enjoy it. It's a great documentary. But I think Americans and as investors, we're really wondering, are the leaders that we're putting in place and the companies that we're investing in, are they ethical, and is the financial performance real or not, and how do we know? So I think families and individuals and family foundations are coming to us more and more. They want us to do due diligence, not on the financials. This is a good company to invest in. Can I make money in my portfolio with this investment? But also, are they ethical? Are they telling us the truth? How do we create a positive change or positive force with our portfolios? And for each of us, that's different. Recently, I met with the head of a major U.S. foundation, and by major, I mean $400 million. And we're talking about SRI, we're talking about creating social change with our portfolio. And I did my presentation, and he came back and said, Rick, I don't care. I want to make as much money as I can so I can give to the causes I believe in. And I was really taken back by that. I said, this is a foundation. And so I was quickly trying to think of an answer to that. And I said, so did I hear you right? So if I were to tell you that there's a company in Tanzania that works 6 to 10-year-old children 20 hours a day in a factory, but the return is 100%, year over year, you'd be interested. And he said, don't be ridiculous. And I said, well, I'm not. You just told me you want the highest return you can get. You don't care. Obviously, he did care, and obviously the truth, that was a little bit outrageous of a statement, but it was to prove a point. So social responsive investing really started with the anti-war movement. The apartheid in South Africa really put a spotlight on it in the media. Today, it's very, very visible in environmental concerns and workplace issues. Diversity, worker safety, healthcare, as costs in healthcare start to soar. What sorts of benefits and things are companies giving to their employees? It's important to note that 20 years ago when you would talk about SRI or socially responsive investing, it was really about negative screens. Let's screen out tobacco, let's screen out firearms, let's screen out these bad things or sin stocks. That's evolved in 20 years to where we're still conscious about social screens, but also being more proactive. How do we identify good companies with good values, and how do those values align with our values as investors? If you heard Jackie Korr's presentation earlier, she sort of laid this out. To put it in context, the total professionally managed universe of all dollars out there is 24.4 trillion. Of that, 2.29 trillion are SRI or socially responsive. The majority of that is falling on the right-hand side on institutions with 1.49 trillion, and of that, about 179 billion are in mutual funds. The left side of this equation, individuals, is about $17.3 billion, and it's very, very rapidly growing. The first dot up there in our practice, we're seeing as women come into wealth and women making money in the workplace are coming to us saying, I want to invest in companies where women are playing senior roles in management, where women have a place on the board, where there's more control in companies. We have religious organizations that come to us, and some of their concerns are they don't want to invest in companies that manufacture contraceptive devices or anything to do with birth control. We have the LGBT community that is coming to us with diversity issues, and how do you get more diversity in the workplace and worker rights. So it's a whole wide array. Socially responsive investing is not one size fits all. To give you some context, this is the same data. Shareholder resolutions are up 16% from 2003. There were 299 proposals. In 2005, there were 348. So investors are wanting to have more of a voice at the table and want more of a say in what their investment portfolios look like, and companies are listening. Companies want to know what their investors are thinking and how they're going to keep them as long-term investors. Investment policy and social policy, this is a really interesting one and has evolved, again, over the past 20 years. It would not be unusual 20 years ago that if each of you were a wealthy family or in a family foundation, that you would have an investment policy for your investments, and you'd have a social policy or a mission statement for your foundation or for your family of how you wanted to run that money or how you wanted to gift that money out. And the two did not meet. So you could have, 20 years ago, a family foundation. Your mission statement could be to save or protect the environment. You'd look at your investment portfolio, and the top 5 stocks could be the largest polluters of the environment, and they didn't match. So we've started to create a link between social policy and investment policy where the two should really be linked, and they should be consistent. There's a relationship there that we all need to be mindful of. I think in any relationship, whether it be a work environment, a marriage, to a spouse, or in your investment portfolio, there are kind of 3 things you can do when you see a situation that isn't working for you. Number 1, and probably the easiest, is do nothing. You kind of hold and hope the problem will correct itself. And you're probably all thinking, I'm thinking about your spouse, or thinking about your boss, or thinking about your investment portfolio. You could cut and run. It's easy to leave. Sell the stock, get out of the portfolio, and move on. Or the third, which is the most difficult, is try and create change and try and do something about it, and sort of call that push and prod. Have dialogue, do something, take action, and a lot of times that is much, much more difficult. Wilshire did a study in 2001, and it was on CalPERS, which is the California State Pension Fund, and it took data from 13 years of data from 1987 to 2000. They looked at 95 companies that CalPERS had identified to have an intervention on. They felt that there was some need there of various types. They looked at the performance of these companies 5 years prior to the intervention, and their performance lagged the S&P 500. Post-intervention, over the next 5-year period, on average, these companies outperformed the S&P 500 by 14%. So having a say or taking action does pay off. And again, that was a Wilshire study. This slide I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. I met someone when I first sat down today at Google, and we were chatting. He was a young employee, a young Googler, and we're chatting, and he said, I've looked at different SRI funds, and I really I struggle with how to pick a good one, and we're talking about, do you measure it by performance? What makes a good fund? I would just caution everyone not to look strictly at performance, but to look at risk-adjusted returns and other elements when selecting investments. Again, screening, step 1, the industry has really evolved from negative screens or screening out sin stocks to more qualitative aspects of a company. Our belief system in Neuberger Berman is it starts with management. If you have good management that's ethical, they're kind to their employees, they're kind to the communities in which they do business, it trickles down through the whole company. You have happier workers, and it shows in performance. Once in a while, companies do sort of stumble. Recently in the news, Whole Foods. How many people here shop at Whole Foods? It's a great place to shop. I shop at Whole Foods and love it. And they have been kind of a darling of SRI investors for quite a while because of their business principles. Although for us, it's been a little bit pricey of a stock. We haven't found a lot of value there. There were 3 recent resolutions that were rejected at their most recent shareholders meeting. And typically, when there's a resolution, a representative will be allowed to stand up in a forum like this and sort of talk about it for at least 30 to 60 seconds. And for some reason, Whole Foods did not allow that to happen. They just basically came out the meeting and said all 3 were rejected. Thank you very much. That was not a great practice, but it also possibly is in violation of SEC Rule 14A8, which can be problematic. When someone stood up and asked a question, why didn't we at least have a discussion around these 3 resolutions to open the floor? The CEO, Mackey, was quoted as saying, if you don't like it, buy another stock. Not the best way to sort of keep investors happy or to really endear yourself to the investment community. So again, even a great company sometimes makes mistakes, but again, it's accountability and transparency. Good corporate citizens, and I think that's sort of what we're all looking to be like, how can we be better? How can we do good? How can we have social change? Some obvious ones: workplace, community, environment. community beyond this community that we work in here in Northern California, but we can also think outside our borders, human rights violations in the Sudan. We can think about state-sponsored terrorism. There are screens that are put on portfolios. People come to us with some very specific screens and things to think about in a much broader, a much larger picture. Corporate governance is a huge one right now. When we touch on the smartest guys in the room and Enron, looking at majority voting and issues like that, just being aware of those things. Recently, 2 corporations voluntarily have taken on majority voting on their own, Intel and United Technologies, sort of leading in that space. Social screening and potential results, again, looking at companies, diversity. We have a company in our portfolio, Toyota. We love Toyota for a lot of different reasons. Great car company, their use of raw materials, the assets they put to work very wisely. One of their top 10 business principles is diversity in their workforce. However, when we looked at their board of directors, guess what? 100% Japanese men. And so we brought that to their attention, and we're a little bit different in our social activism. We tend to engage management more in a diplomatic way as opposed to shareholder advocacy or drafting resolutions and things. We have done that in the past, but we like the first step to be sort of just an open dialogue. So there are ways to create change and to talk to companies without being a total activist, and there are many, many different ways. That's just one example. Also, Danaher is another portfolio company. They create all of the tools made at Sears and hardware, and their company is 100% men for the most part, and that's a problem, and they realized it and hired a consultant, and with some pressure from investors to create change. Also, community good can be done to the bottom line through various charitable giving, employee volunteer programs, community outreach. Also, in environmental management areas, waste reduction. Dell is a company, when you think of toxic waste, you don't really think of a Dell computer as being that, but looking at their product line and looking at a full market cycle as technology changes in the life of a computer is what, I don't know, maybe 5 years. I seem to go through them a little faster than most. They get banged up and break and technology changes. But really just thinking about recycling, battery power, different things that are not obvious. We tend to think of, things as being toxic chemicals. Intel and their use of water was another big one that came out of a SRI dialogue, and use of natural resources for a lot of companies. The 2 biggest things I think, just sort of keep in mind as you think about SRI, think about investing, transparency and accountability, and being able to see what's happening. I think with the EPA and things of that nature, having transparency and sort of the oversight and just accountability for actions of companies is key in creating change through socially responsive investing. Dialogue with management, proxy voting. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Blaine Townsend from Trillium, and he's going to touch on some of the things that I just sort of scratched the surface on. Thank you very much.
My personal tech person, Tim. All right, thank you very much. It's very, I have to use the mic. I can't stroll either. So real quick question. How many people here have actually done what you would call socially responsible investing, choosing mutual funds, doing anything like that in your own personal? And a little bit. And how many people here sort of buy into the age-old conventional wisdom that if you do socially responsible investing, it will cost you money? Excellent. Oh, I spoke too soon. Let me ask again. How many people here think that if you do some socially responsible investing, it will cost you money? So we got a smattering of hands. Obviously, that's something that everyone in this field has heard for many, many years. I think 20 years ago when Trillium was founded, almost 25 years ago, that was the conventional wisdom. A lot like Google, thankfully, Trillium's founder and Trillium's employees did not follow the conventional wisdom. And 25 years later, we are the largest, the oldest and largest independent investment advisor. All we do is socially responsible investing. It's all we've ever done. We're an independent firm, so we're not owned by anybody. It's all we're ever going to do. And it's very interesting in the long arc of time to see how that conventional wisdom, I think if I asked that same question 10 years ago, it would have been every single hand in this room. And we would have had to spend most of our time maybe talking, dispelling that myth a little bit. So what I want to do now is just give a little bit of overview of Trillium. What I thought I would do is just, in a sort of rapid fire way, really take you through Trillium's investment process. How do we pull in community investing, which we heard about today, bonds, cash, stocks, shareholder advocacy screening, all the things that Trillium does, and all the things that you're able to do out there, whether it's with Trillium or Neuberger. Essentially, it's the soup to nuts of what's available. I'll use Trillium as our example. So Trillium, as I mentioned, we're an independent investment advisory firm focused on individual investors and small institutions. Essentially, we manage people's money. In our world, it's high net worth individuals and small institutions, but essentially everything that I'm talking about here today, you could apply to any investor because the concepts are pretty broad. We have 4 offices in Boston, San Francisco, Boise, Idaho, and Durham. We have about 36 employees. We are a majority employee-owned and women-owned firm, and we're a firm founded by a woman. We have about $1 billion under assets under management now, which, given the big numbers that you heard today, seems like maybe a small amount, but every one of these is in a customized, separately managed portfolio whose main goal was to balance the client's financial and social objectives. This is, in fact, our specialty. So I think everyone at Google can identify working for a firm that has tried to throw out there some social values as part of their business practices, even though they're a for-profit firm. 25 years ago, when our firm was founded, we were founded with this specific mission, and it really permeates everything we do to meet the financial, social, and environmental goals of individuals and institutions, to find all means of social progress in the capital markets and educate in their use, to maintain a work environment in which ownership, responsibilities, and rewards are broadly shared, and to support those working to build a just and better world. I think nowadays we're pretty familiar with this kind of language and these kind of ideas. In Wall Street 20 years ago, this was pretty strange stuff. So essentially, as I mentioned, we manage individuals' portfolios. Our style, and I'll just go very briefly over investment things, we're long-term investors, long-term core equities that more or less behave like the broad market, bonds the same, municipal bonds, high-quality corporate bonds, U.S. government bonds, a big component of community investing, which we heard about today. We expose our clients to international funds through mutual funds and ADRs. What makes us very distinctive is the shareholder activism, the proactive approach that we use. Rick painted, some very great broad pictures about what's contained in that world. Trillium really does that work every day. It's a huge component in what we do as investors. So this is our approach, essentially. How do we deliver a portfolio to clients that balance their social and financial objectives? We do it by looking at socially responsible investing as really a process. As Rick said, it's no one-size-fits-all system, but what Trillium does is we concentrate on all the tools that we think are really available. Our investment process starts with social screening, so they're fully integrated in everything that we do financially. We then further customize for clients, if that's what they're interested in. Everything that we invest in and inherited wealth that our clients bring in, we put a lot of our resources into shareholder activism. We're trying to change the capital markets over a long period of time. It's work that takes a lot of resources. You have to fight a lot of small battles over and over and over again to get incremental process. But over 25 years, you've seen the landscape really change incredibly. The whole idea of corporate social responsibility, transparency, environmental reporting. Trillium's had a hand in all those campaigns every step of the way. And we really feel that in order to really balance your financial and social goals, this has to be a critical component. We then weave in community investing. We don't just weave it in by exposing our clients to it, it's part of the investment process. We create total portfolios that expose you to stocks, bonds, cash, community investing vehicles as part of your fixed income portfolio. So we really tailor those. And then as a little firm with 35 or 36 people, our public policy work is really, I think, pretty incredible. It's definitely something that we try to really engage the capital markets as investors, as individuals, as professionals, and try to change it over this long period of time, as I mentioned. So how do we do the portfolio screening? The first step, and I'll go pretty quickly, we have an in-house staff that does social screening, does shareholder activism, does dialogue. We have 3 full-time people and actually 4, we have an open position, but 4 full-time people that what they're doing is they're adding to our financial research the social components of all the stocks that we're looking at, and they engage in company dialogues, and they file shareholder resolutions. We were part of the stakeholder group that got shut off at Whole Foods. You know, those kind of things unfortunately happen to us more frequently than you would think, and I've moved resolutions at Chevron, for example, where I've had my mic cut off. So like I said, these battles are long and hard. And hard avoidance screens, the sin stocks that Rick talked about, those are absolutely out. Proactive companies that we think have innovative products and good financials and are contributing to society are in. The vast majority of companies, it's not black or white, and that's one of the first things that you have to accept, that you're not going to get an all good, you know, publicly traded equity portfolio or an all clean publicly traded equity portfolio, which is why we believe it's so important to engage management to try to change the companies, because in a diversified portfolio, that really helps you control risk. And Rick really, that was an excellent thing to point out, that when you're looking at mutual funds or any investment, risk-adjusted returns. Return is on one side of the equation. How much risk they took to get the return is very important. But if you have a diversified portfolio that can behave like the broad market, even if the companies have been screened, there's going to be a lot of issues there. Whole Foods is a great example. I won't even begin to touch the investment side of this and talk about our investment process. Just to say that the social input, the social research we do goes essentially parallel to all of our valuation screens, our alpha generation screens, everything we do on the investment side to look for good companies. We're looking for growth potential in companies. We're looking for good valuation. However, we really integrate all the social screens. So by the time that we get a buy list that as investors we're going to construct our portfolios for financial reasons, they've already been screened for social reasons. And again, we can go additional with our clients to create specific customized social screens, but everything we do is socially screened. It's completely integrated into our investment process. The second and very, very important component is the active stock ownership. Again, very broadly diversified portfolios, big companies, big footprints. The issues change all the time. We're going to engage the companies all the time. Google is a great example. You know, has wonderful qualities. We really think it's going to be a leader in corporate social responsibility. But all of us know, and even in the last month, new issues have arisen. You know, new questions about Google China, you know, ethics, information, media. I mean, these issues are always evolving. So it's not a static business. It's always changing. The landscape is always moving. We engage in companies in dialogue. We file shareholder resolution. We work with NGOs and stakeholders and other groups, try to help empower them. We create proxy voting guidelines for our clients to make sure that they're voting their proxies consistently. This is really important for foundations, mission-based organizations, for our clients that create family foundations. Proxy voting is something that's overlooked. We also engage in proxy voting campaigns to get big institutional investors to vote for our resolutions. We also use the resolutions, the annual meetings to create media attention for issues, just escalate these issues. Do essentially everything we can as we're investing to try to elevate issues, change the capital markets, help our clients balance their financial and social objectives. This is just some quick recent highlights. In 1999, investment banks didn't even look at the social or environmental impact of their underwriting. So you'd have large Western investment banks, for example, funding the Three Gorges Dam in China without ever looking at the social or environmental impact of that. That's changed now. Through the work of Trillium and other stakeholders, we've actually been at the table with investment banks. They're starting to incorporate these things. We might really not see the full effect of this for 10 or 20 years, but you have to get the work going. You have to start changing these companies. I actually was in charge of our shareholder resolution at Home Depot that started in the late 1990s about their sale of old-growth timber. They were the largest seller of timber in the world, generally a good corporate citizen. Largest seller of timber in the world. They had no idea where their wood came from. They had no idea how it was harvested. They had no idea which species were actually critically endangered, how the indigenous people were treating. Absolutely no idea. They were a phenomenal growth company, had never even considered it. We brought it to the table. A couple years later, they announced a timber procurement policy, created a ripple effect through the markets. Doesn't mean the abuse isn't still happening, but now we have transparency on the issue. We have vendor standards. We have a lot of things. We pushed Pepsi to develop the first comprehensive strategy to address global water scarcity. We actually underwrote and did a policy paper on water for the Pacific Water Institute, I believe it's called. For 20 years, obviously, sweatshops, fair treatment of workers, these are issues that we've been in the trenches dealing with. Transparency, transparency, transparency. It's at the heart of what all investors want. If you've heard the terms efficient markets, it's all about good quality information. It's why you have financial reports now after the stock market crash in the late 20s, because there were pyramid schemes. Companies didn't have to produce that kind of transparency. So from that spirit of financial transparency to make the markets work better, Trillium has done an incredible amount of work on getting environmental transparency, environmental reporting, EEO data disclosure, all these things, because we think it helps all investors. These are the areas that we're currently engaged in. So you can see, again, from a small company, this is every day of our life as investors. Right now, climate change is obviously a huge issue. It's a huge issue outside of Trillium, too. Financing the environment, I mentioned. Genetically engineered food, our resolution at Whole Foods actually helped them agree to do GMO labeling, which they had never been willing to do, the content of their foods. Our range of issues is very broad and does get into the kind of real human rights areas with sweatshops, sexual orientation, non-discrimination. We've been a leader in that. I'm currently working with 2 other people on media reform as an issue, and we're trying to bring a whole bunch of stakeholders together in an initiative that we're calling Open Mic, which stands for Open Media and Information Companies. So not just big media consolidation issues, also internet companies. How do media companies function in society? What is the role of a responsible media company? We've been working on it for 2 years, and we're just now, I think, barely at the beginning of formalizing our strategy around it. Again, this is kind of behind the scenes, tiring, long-term work. I think going forward, what's going on with Wall Street and the investment banking is very important. I mentioned the transparency already. Corporate social responsibility is taking off. I mean, I don't know the statistic now on the number of Fortune 500 companies that have corporate social responsibility reports, but you know it's effective because the right has really tried to attack this as the companies giving in to the left. Essentially, the companies are ignoring them because they see the value in this for their own businesses. So a lot of these fights are being won now, and I think there's a lot of hope, and it's very powerful. Trillium has always put our resources to work. We helped create Siren, which is this network for the investment banks, Coalition for Environmentally Responsible Economies, which some people might have known as Ceres, which really helped start global financial reporting. Community investing, everything you heard today, we have been doing it for 15 years, support it, think it's phenomenal, and I won't spend too much detail because we've heard so much about it, but essentially we help our clients identify, somewhat what Tim was doing, geography, social issue, et cetera. We integrate it into the portfolios. Our public policy involvement, we attack it from all different angles, either from starting organizations to empowering our employees, to working on issue papers, to supporting NGOs. And again, we do this all from our staff of 35, 36 people. We spend a lot of our resources, something like 20% of the money we make is our money management, so our investment management fees, on what we call our social mission. I think this is where our social mission has the most impact. How does this all apply to you or the client? We essentially identify your risk and return objectives like any manager would, help you identify whether it's growth, whether it's income, whether it's tax preservation, or tax-sensitive strategies. What are your financial goals? And again, I'm obviously zipping through this incredibly quickly since we're at the end of our day. We pull this down into what's an ideal asset allocation from you, both from a financial standpoint and from a social impact standpoint, and then we create your portfolio. So one thing I thought would be sort of interesting, I have to step away from the mic for a second, is actually to bring a sample portfolio. It just essentially shows where the rubber meets the road. This is a client who's got financial objectives, has social objectives. I don't know if I have enough for everybody. Okay, thank you. So essentially what this will show you is an appraisal. This happens to be a client that on the spectrum of community investing is really aggressive. So they have a much larger percentage than some of our clients, typically between 1% and 5% of their portfolio. This client has upwards of 10%. But what you'll see in this portfolio are typical positions that you would see in your investment portfolio. You have a diversified stock portfolio, you have municipal bonds, you have fixed income, and you have community investing completely integrated. What I've also done is include a social matrix with that shows you in the equity portfolio that you see there, you'll see all the areas of engagement that Trillium is involved in with the company, and you'll also see some of the high and low points from a social standpoint. Mostly so you get an idea that this is not black and white, and that there's a lot of work being done. And essentially, it's just a sort of real-world example of how a client who has these financial and social goals, it actually gets pulled together at a company like Trillium to deliver a regular portfolio. Our performance is good. Suffice to say, we won't go into this too much, but our equity portfolios really do track the broad markets, the benchmarks that they're supposed to, and on a risk-adjusted basis, they look, even better. To sum up, Trillium is just a specialist in this space of socially responsible investing. I think we've been a pioneer in the field. We really believe it, and it's important for you all to know that whether at Trillium or somewhere else, there's a lot of options out there, and you really can balance your financial and social objectives. So thank you very much.